2026 has barely begun, and the world is already teetering on the edge. Venezuela invaded, Iran under siege, Trump back in power with what he's calling the grand bargain of the century. But here's what most analysts are missing. This isn't chaos, it's a pattern, and Professor Jiang Xueqin saw it coming. On January 5th, just days ago, Professor Jiang released a lecture that reads like a geopolitical playbook for 2026. Empire overextension, resource wars, and a pivotal meeting in April that could determine whether the American empire stabilizes or collapses under its own weight. I'm a huge fan of Professor Jiang's pattern-based thinking, and this lecture stands out because it connects historical hubris to game theory, showing us why what's happening right now isn't just predictable, it's inevitable. So in this video, we're breaking down his thesis, the historical parallels he draws, and the 5 major predictions he makes for this year. And I want to hear from you. Do you think he's right, or is there a flaw in the logic? Let's start with the core thesis. Here's Professor Jiang explaining the game theory lens he uses.
Yeah, so I use game theory, and I basically see geopolitics as a game played by different players who are trying to maximize their own self-interest. So I don't really look at ideology. I don't really look at, I basically focus on self-interest.
This is critical to understanding his predictions. Professor Jiang strips away the rhetoric, democracy versus autocracy, freedom versus tyranny, and focuses purely on incentives. Each player, Trump, Xi Jinping, Putin, is climbing a ladder. And here's the trap. Once you're on the ladder, you can't climb down without looking weak. You can only go up or fall. That's the game theory of mutually assured destruction, but applied to empires, not just nuclear weapons. And right now, the United States is climbing a ladder it might not be able to get off of. So what's driving this? Let's look at the grand strategy.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
To understand 2026, Professor Jiang takes us back to 1971. Nixon removes the dollar from the gold standard. It's now free-floating. So how do you give it value? 2 moves: the petrodollar deal with Saudi Arabia and opening China's economy. The strategy was brilliant. Make China addicted to US dollars by opening American markets and transferring technology. For decades, it worked. But then, the United States started abusing what economists call exorbitant privilege.
Remember that in 1971, Nixon removed the US dollar from the gold standard. And so the US dollar was now free floating. So to stabilize the US dollar, to give it value, he did 2 things. The first is he established the petrodollar, meaning that Saudi Arabia would only allow for its oil to be purchased by US dollars. And the second thing that he did was he visited China to open up China. And so what America did in the 1980s was transfer technology and expertise to China, open its market so that China would become addicted to the US dollar.
But then came the turning point. Endless wars in the Middle East, the 2008 financial crisis, trillions in quantitative easing. China watched the Federal Reserve print money like it was monopoly cash, and they realized our reserves aren't safe, so China started building alternatives. The Shanghai Gold Exchange, the Gold Corridor, Belt and Road. De-dollarization wasn't some ideological crusade, it was insurance. And here's where Trump's strategy comes in. He needs China to keep buying US treasuries. If China dumps them, you get a sovereign debt crisis. Game over. So how do you force China back into dollar dependency? You strangle their resource supply.
And that's what we're seeing right now, right? So by invading Venezuela, what Trump hopes to do is force China to buy oil using US dollars. So where does China get most of its oil? It gets most of its oil from the Middle East. So if Trump were to attack Iran and destabilize the Middle East, then China would be forced to rely more on the Western Hemisphere for its oil supply. But not just the oil supply, but also for silver, for gold, for lithium, for copper, basically all the minerals that China needs to power its EV industry, its AI industry. So this is the grand strategy that's being played out, where Trump is conducting all these wars around the world in order to strangle the Chinese economy, so that China becomes reliant on the Western Hemisphere for its supply, and then China will be forced to buy more U.S. dollars. And that's the great game that we are witnessing right now in 2026.
So Venezuela wasn't random. Iran isn't random. This is a coordinated resource war designed to make China dependent on Western Hemisphere supply chains, which Trump controls. But here's the question. Does this actually work, or does it backfire? Let's look at the historical parallels Professor Jiang draws. Professor Jiang identifies three major historical patterns that mirror what's happening right now. First, World War I denial. European powers in 1913 were convinced war was impossible because their economies were too interconnected. Trade would prevent conflict, and yet by 1914 they were in the trenches. Why? Because hubris overrode logic. Second, Roman vassal betrayals. Rome thought its client states would stay loyal forever. They didn't. The moment Rome showed weakness, the vassals turned. Sound familiar? Look at how US allies are hedging their bets with China right now. Third, and this one's recent, the Maduro kidnapping.
Well, I think he is consistent. He's a mafia boss. And that's what people don't really understand about him. You know, he's not the president of the United States. He's a mafia boss. And once you appreciate that, then he's easy to deal with. Just don't trust him. Just don't take what he says just don't believe anything he says. You know, he's going to do what is in his own personal best interest. Not necessarily the best interest of the United States, but his own best interest. He's going to do what makes him look good. This Maduro raid was counterproductive for the United States. It really hurt the American standing around the world. It made America look like a criminal enterprise, but he doesn't care because it made him look good on TV.
This is the hubris pattern. The United States kidnaps a sitting president, something that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, and expects the world to just accept it. But what it actually does is signal that there are no rules. If the hegemon can kidnap leaders, why would anyone trust the dollar? Professor Jiang calls Trump a mafia boss, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. He's not playing by diplomatic rules. He's playing by leverage and spectacle, and that works until it doesn't. Because here's the trap. Every empire that's collapsed thought it was invincible right up until the moment it wasn't. Rome didn't see the Visigoths coming. Britain didn't see decolonization coming. The Soviet Union collapsed in 2 years after looking unstoppable. And the United States, it's printing money, fighting multiple wars, alienating allies, and assuming it can coerce China into submission. Professor Jiang's point is simple. This is the exact recipe every empire has followed right before the fall. So what does he predict will actually happen in 2026? Professor Jiang makes 5 major predictions for this year. Some are already unfolding. Others will be the real test of his thesis. Prediction 1, the April Grand Bargain.
So I would say that this event in April, when Trump visits China, Trump needs to figure out a lot of things before April, okay? So what we're seeing in South America is the United States establishing hegemony, military hegemony throughout South America. And we will see an escalation of that over the next few months, especially with regards to Colombia and Mexico. Possibly Brazil as well.
April is the pivot point. Trump visits China for a state visit, and Professor Jiang believes they'll strike a deal. China agrees to keep buying dollars in exchange for the US backing off Taiwan or easing tech sanctions. But to get leverage before that meeting, Trump needs to escalate everywhere else first. South America, Africa, the South China Sea. Maximum pressure before the negotiation. Prediction 2, Western Hemisphere escalation. Colombia, Mexico, possibly Brazil. Venezuela was just the opening move. Professor Jiang expects Trump to pressure Colombia and Mexico next, possibly even picking a fight with Lula in Brazil. Why? To demonstrate control over the hemisphere before sitting down with Xi. Prediction 3, Africa becomes a battleground.
We can also expect to see more conflict in Africa as well, because Africa is where, in national security strategy, Trump said very vocally that he will not cede Africa to China. That America and its allies will challenge China wherever it can.
Africa has the minerals China needs for EVs and AI. Trump's strategy: deny China access by destabilizing Chinese partnerships across the continent. Prediction 4: Japan-China tensions spike. Expect the US to push Japan into more aggressive postures toward China. Naval exercises, defense pact expansions, anything to pressure Beijing before April. And prediction 5: the Iran endgame.
And then you'll have this meeting in April, and I think there are 4 meetings actually scheduled for 2026. So Trump needs to resolve the China issue, and the reason why is the endgame is Iran. He needs to resolve the China issue before he launches a full-scale invasion of Iran. Russia will come to Iran's defense. There's nothing that Trump can do about it. The wild card right now is China, what China will do in response to an Iran invasion. And so the endgame is Iran. China is maybe the penultimate boss before Iran. But I think if I were a betting man, and I think people will be surprised by this, China and the United States will come to an arrangement.
This is the ultimate test. If the April deal happens, China stays neutral on Iran and Trump invades. If the deal fails, China could retaliate economically, dump treasuries, embargo rare earths, shut down trade. And that brings us back to the ladder. Professor Jiang's core argument is this: the United States is trapped in a game theory scenario where every move forward increases the risk of collapse, but backing down looks like weakness. Trump can invade Venezuela, threaten Iran, pressure China, but each escalation makes the dollar less stable, not more, because trust isn't built through coercion, and empires don't survive on spectacle. The pattern is clear, the hubris is visible. The only question is whether America recognizes it in time. So here's my question for you. Do you think the April grand bargain will happen? Will China cave to pressure, or will they call Trump's bluff? And more importantly, do you see flaws in Professor Jiang's logic? Is he missing something? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This is the first video in our curated series on predictive history. If you want more deep dives into geopolitical patterns and what they mean for the future, subscribe and hit the bell. Original lecture link in the description. Go watch the full conversation with Glenn Deason. It's worth your time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.